Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Q&A. Footage in the background is of God knows what, but probably something other than Ellie. I've been playing way too much Ellie lately, and I sort of noticed as well, many of my videos are just Ellie. Someone appreciated the fact that I was playing Necromancer in PvP last week, so hey, we'll do something slightly different for this week. One thing before the questions, I do want to touch on just a little bit of news, I suppose, or elaboration on one of the topics from last week, and that's the idea of role-playing. A lot of people liked what I said about the current state of role-playing and how it's basically been ruined, but I also did have a couple of interesting perspectives from some people, namely about how role-playing hasn't changed very much at all. Now, I mentioned this just as another side of the coin, just as another facet to the discussion to be had. Not that I necessarily side with it and now believe that RPing is fine and should just be completely ignored and everything's all and wonderful, but I did hear that many of the serious RP communities, specifically over on EU, I believe this was, are functioning just fine because before the mega servers went out, they chose a specific area of the world, or multiple specific areas of the world, that are interesting roleplay settings, but in terms of regular gameplay for the game, mean very little. And for those who are more stationary in the way that they roleplay, things are still fine. So for example, you can pick, say, a random inn out in one of the maps, and all the RPers know, just generally as a community, oh, this is sort of an RP hotspot. The regular players and people who don't care are running around just doing their map completion, never even considering saying go inside this inn, while the role players are generally left to themselves and can use stuff like local chat rather than map chat to communicate and continue playing the game they like. And this is so advanced, even many people who are doing this kind of thing even have their like own RP reasons and stories about why they're in these inns and in these certain places. So there are sort of very rough player solutions in place right now, but I do think it's still a problem that the devs should be looking at. The greatest solution, my solution I offered last week, was kind of a crappy one, to be honest. I just came up with it on the fly. The greatest, most simple to implement and elegant solution I have seen is simply adding another tab that is not enabled by default, but another option in the chat box to have a roleplay check on it. And yes, this may mean the physical players you see out in the world aren't, you know, emoting at you all the time and actually roleplaying in a really nice way, but at least for chat, you can just have one of these tabs set up where while you're on it, the only people you see using this tab are other role players, and this could be maybe a map-wide tab and very less prone to trolling. That's a really good solution, I think, just because it wouldn't take that much for the devs to implement, and the community could use it rather well. However, obviously, it's still a sticky situation. I just wanted to touch on it again. Anyway, all that guff said, let's move on to the actual questions. The first one comes from Crimson Guild, who says, hey WP, I didn't play Guild Wars 1, but I've watched your lore recap videos. There's a great story there. I did try to play Guild Wars 2, but was disappointed in the lore content. I stopped playing, but tried to stay informed in case I ever wanted to come back. From what I've seen on your Q&A videos, the Season 1 living story was bizarre to say the least, and hasn't really drawn me back to the game. Do you think overall that the lore in Guild Wars 2 suffers, and is not up to par as to what was offered in Guild Wars 1? I haven't really broached this topic for a long while, and I want to restate something that I believe many people can forget quite easily, okay? Guild Wars 1 did have a good story for what story was there, but you have to be careful not to blow it up more than it really was. The thing with Guild Wars 1 was it had good stories, the idea of the civil war in Krita and actual armies and nations fighting one another, cults and who the true gods are, and the general excitement of finding an entirely new, fantasy world is all very cool, but also the Guild Wars 1 story was incredibly narrow. You know, we were only dealing with humans, and ultimately, when you looked at the first 3 campaigns, they all tied into the same great enemy. And there were a lot of really cool facets to that and creative environments and ideas, especially when you look at QandA with the Jade Sea and the Echo Vowed Forest. I specifically remember when I was younger, getting a friend of mine, or he played it for a little while, but trying to get a friend of mine into Guild Wars 1, long before I ever did videos, where how I got him into the idea of the game was I explained the lore of factions, and I explained to him the story of the Harvest Temple and the Jade Wind destroying these beautiful regions and turning them into these fantastic petrified locations, and, you know, really capturing his attention and his imagination. And that's what you could do with the Guild Wars 1 story. Like, there were these really phenomenal stories you could tell everywhere you looked, but the scope of the universe was incredibly narrow, and for some things the story was terrible. If you were the kind of person who's really into single-player RPGs that has your personal character's influence affect the world, Guild Wars 1 offered almost nothing. They did very well in Nightfall for that. You could make a lot of cool decisions, but it was very weak in that regard. Guild Wars 2 has a much greater breadth of lore. It's got way more stories and far more opportunity for you, in theory, to impact the world, particularly if you look at the way that they scaled the personal story. They created all these branches to try and give you that illusion. They failed with that task, but there is a lot more opportunity there. Yes, geographically we have far less areas to explore, but there is more breadth. And you have to remember in Guild Wars 2 also, that all that Guild Wars 1 lore is technically still there. Like, they have only expanded on this universe, they haven't shrunk it down. Yes, they may have pushed many of the really cool things from the first game aside, and rarely ever look at them, and it seems like they will never be addressed again. It's still there as a part of the universe. I can describe to you all of that Guild Wars 1 lore while we're discussing the topic of Guild Wars 2. So I do think that Guild Wars 1 wasn't as amazing as maybe you remember it to be. It's one thing to explain to people the story of Vizier Kilbron and his transformation into a lich and his kidnapping of Prince Rurik after he died on the Shiver Peaks. It's one thing to explain all that stuff and make it sound super cool, and you forget how bland and rubbish it really was implemented in the first game. The Guild Wars franchise has always struggled at actually telling its stories, and Guild Wars 2 is just as bad as the first one. The difference is we're still playing Guild Wars 2, and all those terrible areas of it are still right up in our faces. I'm sure if Guild Wars 3 came along, there'd be lots of people very nostalgic and reminiscent of all the different stories that came out with Guild Wars 2, including stuff like Scarlet. Now, the idea of the Living World, I think personal story was done pretty badly in Guild Wars 2, and Living World, really, it's not that much better. I found it very interesting that your description of how it went was that the Season 1 Living story was bizarre, to say the least. You know, describing it as bizarre should be a real wake-up call to the devs that, wow, we weren't very good at plotting out a sensible and easy-to-follow narrative here. It was a lot of weird stuff that eventually was strung together at the last moment. I think that Season 1 was all over the place. I completely agree, and I think that's because they didn't have an end goal when they started it. There is no way that they knew all about Scarlet and everything that was going to happen last year when they first started designing Living World, because if they did, they wouldn't have started with random stuff about the Molten Alliance. I promise you. They didn't even know they were going to do seasons, and I have more respect for them to believe that they set out this whole story and then they ended up doing such a weird botched version of it. I have a lot of confidence in Season 2 though, because now they really do know what they're doing. They know they've got seasons coming up, they've got it all planned out, a beginning, a middle, and an end, presumably for this season and multiple seasons off into the future. It's actually planned and it's in place, and they know as a company what they can actually implement with every individual patch. So both in terms of the story that they're trying to tell us and the actual quality of the storytelling, I think are going to be vastly improved in Season 2. I think the storytelling itself got pretty good after the Tower of Nightmares arc. I really do think that. I think most patches they did very well, certainly much better than previous attempts. I'm not saying that they shouldn't seek to continue improving, because I absolutely think they should, but I do have a lot more confidence in Season 2, and hopefully, you know, casual people who've been out of the game for a while aren't going to look back on it and describe it as bizarre, because that is not a good sign in my opinion. Anyway, probably talked for too long on that. Next question is from Walder B, who says, "Hey WP, would you be completely devastated if you managed to complete your goal with Ascended Armour, and soon after ArenaNet comes out with Legendary Armour with the same functionality as the weapons, which allow you to swap stats?" I would be pretty upset. I've got to be honest, I'd be very upset. However, you have to consider, if they're going to add Legendary Armour, wouldn't it make sense for them to have Ascended Armour be a part of the crafting of that? You know how we have precursors for Legendary weapons right now? Surely Legendary Armour would have Ascended Armour as precursors? I actually, I was thinking the other day for quite a long time, mapping out how I would deal with a Generation 2 of Legendary weapons. And you wouldn't have exotic precursors for any more Legendary weapons they brought out, would you? You'd have Ascended weapons. These are supposed to be crazy difficult to get. So, you know, I would also assume that I wouldn't be totally devastated, because I'd probably use my current Ascended Armour in the crafting of the Legendary stuff. I don't think they're going to let people skip the tier like that. I really don't. I like Matt Visual, who you've seen on my channel a few times, and I do podcasts every week with. He's sort of waiting for Legendary Armour instead of going for Ascended Armour, and I think that's a mistake he's making. I think when it finally comes out, they're just going to have the Ascended Armour be a part of the crafting of it. Why would they let you skip? This stuff is supposed to be hardcore, really difficult, long-term endgame stuff. It just wouldn't make any sense the other way. Sort of on the same topic as well, one of the reasons I picked this question is I actually had my Ascended Armour. I've had my Ascended Armour almost 3 weeks now. What I've been going for since then are infusions that give you +5 power and +5 agony resist for each slot. You get 14 slots, so in total it's +70 power, which is about 2 might stacks. It's pretty cool. Now this stuff costs a lot of money. This is what I've been working and grinding on for a long time. I think I'll finally have it maybe this time next week, a little bit earlier, around about when the next patch comes out. The funny thing is though, it's quite likely there's going to be better versions of these infusions in the future. Already data mineable in the game are infusions that give you +7 power and +6 agony resist instead of just +5 to both. So the question to me really is, what if I get all of my infusions and then suddenly they add in dual crafting 500 and the ability to get all of these infusions? That's going to make me pretty sad. I would hope that ArenaNet would have the foresight to include these +5 infusions that I'm currently going for in the recipes for the +7. Right, so in this way people can't skip. What they're doing here is a gear treadmill for peanuts. That's really what it is. This is the Guild Wars 2 gear treadmill, right? Going for these little infusions, and they can keep making them better and better. The current ones in the game are blue. The data mined ones are green rarity. They could eventually add rare, exotic, or even ascended infusions. You know, extra tiers up, but only for peanuts that nobody's ever really going to care about unless you're super into the game, which I currently am right now. The mistake for them to do would be add dual crafting 500 and just let people skip the infusions I'm currently grinding my ass off for. There's 2 reasons you don't want to let people skip. Reason number 1 is going to make people like me very sad. You know, I've spent all this time, thousands and thousands of gold on it, and now it's just been wiped and I could have basically skipped it because I could have crafted it anyway. And number 2, it means that anyone who's going for this stuff actually does have a bit of a, you know, a progression and a treadmill to go up. They can say, right, okay, I'm full exotic. Now I want to go full ascended. Now I want to go full ascended infused with, say, the +4s because they're cheap. Now I want to go the +5s. Now I want to turn my +5s into +7s. You should enforce that. That should be a route that everybody goes through rather than just sort of skipping along the line. So I hope that they make the +5s part of the crafting for the +7s, and maybe at the same time in the patch introduce a way to extract infusions from armor so you can take it out and then upgrade it. But yeah, who knows how they'll do it, and that is a little bit of a worry of mine because this little project has taken a lot longer than I thought it would. You know, this is why people don't like the World of Warcraft model, because you can grind so long, get the max tier, and then they just bring out an expansion and nullify it all. Guild Wars 2 has always stood for not doing that, and allowing people to skip does exactly that. So the devs need to be mindful, and I hope they are. I'm talking so long in these questions. The next one's from Ultra and Alt, who, this isn't Guild Wars 2 related, but I do want to talk about it. He says, a question on Final Fantasy X. Hey WP, is the whole FFX thing still on the table? It's a game I'm personally very interested in, and have been holding off watching LPs of it. If it's canned, let me know. It is not canned. Listen to this, yeah? This is a wire I got in the mail today. Quite literally today. This is my HDMI to component cable. This is what I've needed to hook up my capture card to my PS3 so that I can actually play the game and record it. I did used to have this set up. I have that like unfinished Uncharted Let's Play on my channel, which was a PS3 game I was playing. I thought I had all the cables therefore when I was signing on to this project, but no, apparently I didn't. The reason it's taken so long to come out is mostly a money thing. I had to wait until I got paid so I could actually get the game. Then once I did, I was back down to the wire, and of course I needed a cable, which I then realized. So I've had to wait again, but finally it's here. So I promise you guys we will be playing that very soon. I'm actually going to start my test file, if not tonight, then tomorrow night, and really indulge myself in that game again. And I can't wait to share it with you guys. It'll be like another Azuric. We'll start having daily videos going out with that. It'll be wonderful, I promise. The next question is from Johnny Kirkzinksy. I've said your name wrong, I'm sorry. Who says, hey WP, I have a question. I main a level 52 ranger and I seem to be wearing the same armor. Have you got any tips on getting armor on lower level characters? Thank you. Well, so your problem here is that you're playing a medium armor class, and ArenaNet don't seem to be so great at designing medium armors that look different. It's all trench coats, and you don't really realize you are wearing different looking armor because it's so subtle. If this is really your first character, I mean, you're saying your main isn't even level 80. If this is your first character, my main advice would be crafted armor. There's like 2 different skin types that you can get from crafted armor that you could look for. There's also 2 different aesthetic sets you can get from completing hearts. Every time you complete a heart, actually have a speak to that NPC. You will see that they sell armor, and often that armor is of a unique skin type. So maybe you could be toggling between your heart armors, your crafted armors, and then maybe even found stuff too. Don't forget there is the gem store. If you don't mind spending some money for gems, if it's your first character, you're probably not going to have enough gold to convert into gems. gems. But if you want to spend just a little bit of real life cash, you can get a unique skin there. If you've bought the heroic edition of Guild Wars 2, there's another unique skin set that you can get with that. And generally, as you progress through the game, finally when you hit level 80, your options are just going to explode. And then you can go around collecting a bunch of skins, and they'll be permanently unlocked and available for your new low-level characters too. That would be my advice to you, but yeah, I can see how you're a little bit limited in your first time. Those would be what I'd look at. The next question is a lore question from Rini Padilla, who says, what is the current state on the Realm of Torment? Well, in theory, it should be a pleasant place we can go and hang out and enjoy. So for people who don't know what the Realm of Torment is, typically the human gods each had a realm associated with them, a plane of existence of which they lived and ruled over. We got to visit 2 of these in the first game. One of them was known as the Underworld, and this is where Grenth hung out. These places also, for humans in the lore, at least for the first game, when a human died, they would be judged and sent to one of these many different planes of existence. You know, many people would end up in Grenth's domain, the Underworld, and, you know, as the Lord of the Dead. Grenth's position actually was a judge of these people, and he would decide where they go. There was another one called the Fissure of Woe, and this was Balthazar's realm. It was also like an internal battlefield 250 years ago, as he was in constant fight with his half-brother Menzies, and his half-brother had his own army of shadow creatures, and they would always be fighting. And these 2 realms, the Underworld and the Fissure of Woe, you could go to. They were endgame areas in the first game. Very well designed endgame areas, might I add. Now, when Nightfall came out, the 3rd campaign, they introduced to us the idea of a 6th god, Abaddon, the fallen god, the god that was wiped from all records, and this is why we never knew about him. But it turned out he was still there, and he was gaining power. He was going to break free, inflict Nightfall upon the world, and destroy us all. And so the plot of Nightfall was to go in there and kick Abaddon's arse. The plot eventually took us into an area known as the Realm of Torment. This was Abaddon's realm. An interesting quality to the story here is that the Realm of Torment was just where Abaddon was imprisoned. I don't think necessarily that was his domain until he was imprisoned there, and eventually, you know, his power began to seep and he twisted it into whatever he wanted it to be. But this was the Realm of Torment. It was like the most hellish place. Underworld sounded like hell to you, maybe? The Fissure of Woe, a fiery plane of existence full of war, that sounded like hell to you, maybe? No. The Realm of Torment was as corrupt, destructive hell as you could imagine. Like, it was all about fear and warped nightmares and abominations and just crazy dark stuff. Very, very cool area. And hostile to us too. All of the remnants of Abaddon's life, like the people who followed him while he was a god, were a group of seafarers who lived in the Crystal Desert called the Marganites. And when Abaddon was stricken down and cast into this prison, all of his Marganites were too. And so there was this race of demons who lived there, the Marganites, that had cities built within the Realm of Torment and had truly made it their own home. There were also these weird entities as well. They were like stone constructs, these tablets that also sort of wandered around there and were supposedly minions of Abaddon. Anyway, so this is what the place was like. It was very hostile, and during the events of Nightfall, we go inside, we kill Abaddon, and Cormyr takes his power. You cannot kill a god, you can only take the power he holds. And so Cormyr becomes the new god, and Cormyr is a nice god. Cormyr is not corrupt. She has not been in prison her entire life and suffered through all this anguish. So she meets up with all the other gods and says, yay, I'm a good god now. And they all leave together. But what does this mean for the Realm of Torment? Well, that means that Cormyr has inherited the Realm of Torment, and now it is known, apparently, as the Redeemed Realm, I believe is the term they use, and in theory, she's made it all nice and wonderful again. So instead of being all corrupt and twisted and nightmarish and hellish, it's just a nice realm. What does that mean it looks like now? Who knows? Does it still have artifacts of Abaddon's time there, or has it been improved somewhat? You have to consider things like the Marganites and their cities as well. The Marganites were demonic creatures that were completely our enemy the entire time through Guild Wars 1, but now that Cormyr is their god, do they now worship Cormyr, and are they now on side with us? You know, some people suggest, oh, they should make Marganites a playable race for Guild Wars 2. They may not be too off the money. Like, as crazy as that sounds, they're in theory not our enemies anymore. And in theory, they have nice cities and things within this realm, the Redeemed Realm. Very curious what could be going on there. And in general, this whole demon storyline and things to do with those gods specifically has phased out of Guild Wars 2, as I was discussing earlier, which is a bit of a shame. I was actually talking to a friend in-game just today, and she had potions of demon slaying in Guild Wars 2, and it's like, okay, what is a demon in Guild Wars 2? There's barely a term we ever hear, and it's stuff like imps and really boring things. Well, in the first game, you could get like basically the equivalent of a sigil. You could get like a sigil that would be like of demon slaying, and that would be really, really cool. It'd be like if you farmed in a certain area of the game, you'd be like, hell yeah, finally. Because there were so many demons in the plot of the first game, and the demons just aren't around anymore. Probably because they're now on side, because they're under Cormyr's wings. I do have one more question, which I'm just going to have to go over very quickly. The video's already too long. Sorry if you feel gypped, but 92VBBB, very interesting name, says, do you think something like Guild Wars 1 Beyond would work in Guild Wars 2? Personally, I think you can answer some of the complaints about the lack of permanent content. Unsure if you've had this question before, but why not? What's your opinion? Well, really, let's think about it. What's the difference between Guild Wars 1 Beyond and the Living Story? Very little. The Guild Wars 1 Beyond just kept the content in the game as it rolled out, and that's about it. For those who don't know, when Guild Wars 1 was like done and the devs were all working on Guild Wars 2, they sent a very, very small team of people to continue giving content for Guild Wars 1, and they created this thing called Guild Wars Beyond, which was basically Living Story. It was a series of quests that kept rolling in the game in very small amounts that continued the story and bridged the gap between the two games. The difference was Guild Wars 1 Beyond, whenever they added something new in the game, it stayed there. It didn't go away. It was added, and it was another thing you could do once you reached level 20. It was the same thing. It's just Living World chooses to remove the stuff it adds. And that's a huge discussion. I'm not going to go into it, so thank you very much for watching, guys. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask, please feel free to let me know. I'm doing basically one of these videos every week lately, quite regularly, so tune in next week and hopefully I will have picked your question. Hope you guys enjoyed, have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you next time.